Can you all hear me? All right. Excellent. Well, welcome to the AI Chicago TAP webinar. Is artificial intelligence going to take my job? Probably not. Let's hope. We'll talk about that. My name is David Ivey. I am the Senior Design Technology Manager with HOK, sitting in the Chicago office. I see a few Chicago peeps on the call, so welcome. This webinar, will probably take between 30 and 45 minutes. We'll have ample time for questions. We're going to look at a few resources on the web that this presentation was kind of built around. The idea here for this particular presentation is to give you a kind of lay of the land, right? It's meant to be a primer. It's not a deep dive into any specific tool. It's just a taste of the landscape, like I said, and it's not exhaustive. I personally am not an AI expert. My job as a design technology manager is to manage all the tools that we have and assess new tools, and this is definitely a tool. And so there are people out there that probably know as much or more than me, maybe less than me. If you have some expert knowledge, feel free to add it to the chat. If it looks corrective in nature, I'm happy to be corrected where that happens. There are a lot of resources. We'll see that as we go through them. In keeping up with all of the resources, especially at this particular point in time where AI is concerned, feels like a full-time job. But I encourage you not to become discouraged because I think the best thing to do is just to kind of continually try to immerse yourself in it if you're interested in it, if you want to see what it could mean for our profession or your job or the practice in general. Just read and watch what you can, and the landscape will become clearer over time, or at least less blurry, let's say. So the idea that it may take my job, well, I guess it depends on your job. That's why I said probably not. I mean, I think what we're going to see here in the short term is a lot of working in conjunction with AI in the next 3 to 5 years, and maybe somewhere down the line in the 5 to 10 year range, there'll be jobs that, much like Pony Express riders or other things, that may be handled completely by AI. So we'll take a look at what we think maybe some of those are. I'm going to go ahead and dive into the presentation. I'm going to turn my video off because I just feel sometimes it's a little bit of a distraction. So I'll come back at the end and we can talk and do questions. So moving on. What are the learning objectives for this particular session? So we want to learn more about AI and its relationship to our industry, to the architectural industry. And so that'll be one thing that hopefully you'll come away with a better feeling about what that is. We want to become familiar with some of the tools and their capabilities. We'll look at a lot of tools and a lot of processes. And again, not necessarily deep dives, but here it is, here's what's due. So you can maybe, follow up on it later if it's something that's of interest to you. But there are just so many tools right now that it's hard to really look at them all. And kind of figure out what could the impact be on the future of this profession with the AI tools that are coming online and the things that are planned and the things that maybe right now don't work really well, but you can see where it's headed or you can see the potential. And then we'll look at some examples of current AI implementations and some of the things that our firm is looking at and kind of dipping our toe into the water to see where it'll lead. So what exactly is AI? AI is not one thing, but I think it's many things. And I think people tend to use the many things that are under this umbrella of AI as a single term. So they call everything AI. A lot of what you'll hear are different types of methods of producing some sort of artificial intelligence. And we'll talk in a minute about the different kinds, but you'll hear the terms machine learning, neural networks, and deep learning. And deep learning is really just a sort of a neural network that has more layers. It has some hidden layers to it. And so there's a lot of processing going on in the background. But those all fall under the umbrella, like I said, of artificial intelligence. So these all get kind of used interchangeably, even though they don't necessarily mean the same thing. So it's good to know that, when you're talking about artificial intelligence, you may need to be more specific about what type of artificial intelligence we're talking about. So artificial intelligence falls into three very broad categories. The first is kind of artificial narrow intelligence. This is really where we are right now. Things like Siri, things like Alexa are what are considered weak AI. They don't have much knowledge beyond what they can resource maybe on the web or some things that are built in. For instance, asking for the time or the date or to book a restaurant, those types of things. But they're really just language or verbal extensions for kind of a narrow intelligence. And then we have the things that I think alternately excite and scare people, which are the strong AI versions, which have sort of been the goal all along. The artificial general intelligence, or AGI, and artificial superintelligence are both strong AIs, and not something that we really currently have in any form yet. But I think we are on the path to those things, and we'll talk a little bit about at the end about the caution of doing these things really just too fast. So first, I just want to kind of talk briefly about like a history of maybe computing and artificial intelligence in some ways, but kind of where we've been over the last few hundred years. Back in the 1800s, one of my favorite things to talk about is the Mechanical Turk, which was a sensation all around Europe, really from the late 1700s to the early or to the mid 1500s, when it was finally accidentally destroyed in a fire. But this was a chess-playing automaton, and it baffled people all over Europe for literally over 50 years. And the way that it worked was that there was actually a person inside the box. How this was never found out for 50 years, begs another question. But it's kind of fake AI, fake machine learning. After the Mechanical Turk in the 50s, in the 1950s, Alan Turing came up with the Turing test, right? And about the same time that computers were starting to come online and be understood a little more, Turing built his machine that cracked Enigma, at the end of the Second World War. And the Turing test is meant to be able to be given to a person, an interrogator, who then talks to a human and a computer. And the idea is the interrogator needs to find out whether the human is a human or the computer is a human. And so, for a long, long time, no machines really could come close to passing any kind of Turing test. You could pretty easily spot them with their kind of mixed up language and unasked for references to other things. So it was easy to spot them. Then in the 1960s, one of the early kind of chatbots, if you will, was Eliza. So kind of a Rogerian psychotherapist, right? And by being Rogerian, right, it basically had a whole bunch of questions loaded into it, right? And it looked at your responses like a Rogerian psychotherapist and answered your questions or your comments with other questions, which is a little easier, but the questions often increasingly became odd or not inappropriate, but not relevant. And so Eliza was obviously interesting and people played with it a lot, but it was obviously not the kind of tool that could pass a Turing test. Then in the 70s, a lot of things started coming together all at once. Expert systems and machine learning became more ubiquitous, and by the 80s and 90s, a lot of these tools were starting to be put together into actual functional tools. And one of the things that you would see with expert systems that you would recognize today is something like WebMD, right? Where the system doesn't really know much about you per se, but it can lead you down a path. It's got an expert who feeds their knowledge into a database. And then there's an inference engine and a user interface, and you can say, my knee hurts. What could it be? And then give you a series of diagnoses based on that. And so that's kind of an example of expert systems in machine learning. And then we get to adding more things to machine learning and getting deeper learning and deeper neural networks. And you start to think about things like Big Blue, which beat Garry Kasparov at chess in the late 80s, early 90s. I think they had a rematch. You think he won the first match, and then he lost the second match as Deep Blue became better. And it's really more of a brute force thing, right? And these systems aren't necessarily cognizant that they're playing chess, or that in the way that a human would. They basically know all the chess moves. They've studied all the chess moves. They've been trained on chess games from decades and decades. Same with AlphaGo, which is a little bit more recent tool that beat Lee Sedol at AlphaGo, the world champion. And it showed a lot of, it's tough to use the word creativity, but in both cases, there are moves and positions that these systems would create that no human had ever tried before. And we'll talk about maybe a little later why that could be a bad thing as well. But, it's actually an excellent documentary. So if you get the chance, you should watch the AlphaGo documentary. So, we have some expert systems that we use today. AutoCAD architecture is kind of an adaptive system. It understands, if you build a door and you stick it in a wall, that it needs to cut out for that wall. It's based on rules and stuff. And then Revit is more parametric, and it's a little bit better about understanding certain categories of things, but only because we've told it in advance, right? I mean, it knows that a chair is a chair because it's in the chair category, but I could have easily built a table in a chair, a piece of casework in a chair family, or vice versa. And Revit wouldn't really know the difference. It lacks context, right? It can't say, oh, well, I see that you're calling it a chair, but it doesn't look like a chair to me. Then you have Rhino, which is also parametric, and then we get into Grasshopper and Dynamo, which are also generative, but they're built on models that are limited, right? You can't, for instance, if you don't have an array node, you can't really build an array. You can't explain that to it without that node being available to you. So what is all the buzz, right? So we've got a lot of tools, and I think a lot of this started, it's actually older than the buzz would have you believe, but over the last several months, things like ChatGPT and DALL-E have become something that everybody's heard of, not just a few people who are early adopters. So what just happened? Well, the algorithms that are being used to run these tools are not necessarily new. They've been around for a while. They've been tweaked and improved, but it's not like there was some breakthrough in algorithms. What really has happened is that those algorithms have access to larger and higher quality data sets that are far more ubiquitous. So having large data sets to be able to train these tools on makes them better tools. So a large part of the sudden jump in ability is because of the data sets that are getting larger. GPT, which is sort of a generative pre-training tool, has been around for 5 or 6 years. We'll talk about, I have one of the resources I have is a resource on YouTube called 2-Minute Papers, which is an excellent resource for just kind of staying up to date on everything related to artificial intelligence, rendering, gaming. There's a lot of interesting things that come out of there. And it's actually where I heard about GPT these 5 long years ago. DALL-E's been around for a couple of years, and most people have heard of that. That's an image generation tool. But it's hard to keep up with all of the hype right now because it's coming fast and furious at us. So where are we on this hype cycle? Well, one of the first things that I think people started advertising was this idea that ChatGPT got to 1 million users faster than any other tool in history. These are the next closest ones. Instagram took 75 days to get to 1 million users. Spotify took 150 days. Literally within 5 days, everybody was trying to use ChatGPT, and the servers really felt that. It was a very fast adoption by a wide array of people, and I don't know where it's at now, but you know, people are signing up for it every single day. So where are we kind of on this curve? I don't know that we're exactly where it says you are here, but I like this curve for the two gray areas in there, the disappointment and the chaos amazement areas, right? So I think for a long time, there's been stuff around, whether it's something like ELIZA or WebMD or these other things that have been kind of interesting, but sort of a disappointment. And we felt kind of on a linear curve. And then suddenly it's like, well, maybe we're not on that curve. Maybe we're really now on this more exponential curve. And we've kind of dipped over into that first gray area where people are, there's a lot of stuff going on. It's very confusing. There's a lot of experimentation. There's a lot of development. And a lot of people are very amazed by what these tools can do. So Gartner puts out this kind of chart for a lot of tools on a yearly basis. This is the Gartner hype cycle. And this is the path that a lot of tools take. They have a very interesting animation. If you go to the Gartner site, you can see the past 25 years. It goes to about halfway through 2019. Kind of didn't do a lot of this during the pandemic, but we're somewhere in this area here in where the rectangle is, in my opinion. We've got early adopters who are investigating this thing and have been for a while. There is definitely a lot of mass media hype going on. You know, it's you can fall down and find an article or see a video or a newscast or whatever talking about ChatGPT or DALL-E or whatever. And the supplier proliferation, right? We'll look in a little bit at some of the people that are just, there's so many people making tools right now. Some of them are being monetized, some are open source. It just sort of depends. Some of them are based on open source stuff. So we're getting into this thing, and you know, there's no necessarily fine line between how kind of stretched out this peak can be, whether we're going to be, you know, we're starting to get activity now beyond early adopters. So, you know, we could be a little further along this curve, but we're definitely not on the downside. And you know, the length of this downside and the curve, these can all kind of change. So we just kind of have to wait and see for a lot of this, but we're definitely kind of at the top of the hype, I think. So what are some of the tools that may be useful, the AI tools that may be useful in AEC right now? Well, ChatGPT 3 and 4, which are large language models, right? They're based on these large databases of language, and they're predictive in nature. So ChatGPT looks at what you ask and it sort of understands it based on having a large library of words and sentences and things to look at, and then can start to create responses to your prompts. Other places, Azure Cognitive Services has a lot of stuff for captioning of images and tag extraction for ID, one of the things that we're looking at. And ID is, I should mention that ID is for disabled people. So images want to have tags in them so that they can be descriptive of what the image is. So we can have one of the tools that do like AI, like a Midjourney or a Midjourney or a ChatGPT, to look at an image and pull out information based on what it understands to be in that picture, so that it can be descriptive to someone who may not, or who may be visually impaired. And then Microsoft Copilot is a tool that's an unreleased Office AI assistant that will come out at some point and change a lot about how we work with kind of those basic Office tools. And there's a lot of tools that are interesting, but not very useful in practice yet. And I think, you know, when we start to look and talk about some of the DALL-E and image generation, GPT-based image generation, or other things like Midjourney, which also does, like I said, image to text, you'll see that for image generation, it's hard to find a use case where that's really valuable to someone in an architectural profession, at least right now. Adobe Firefly, they have their own version of a Dolly type tool for image creation, as does Stable Diffusion. One of the things you'll find, I'm sorry, click the button too fast. One of the things you'll find with all of these tools that they all have in common is that they have generally the images can be a little squirrely, right? They look good from a distance, but then when you start to look a little closer and you see artifacts and oftentimes they have a poor understanding of details, right? Like a soffit might, look really contorted at a corner because it doesn't understand really what's happening there. So they look good for from a distance and then quickly kind of fade as you zoom in. And there are a lot of tools that are on the way. So just a few of these are just looking at text, images, video, presentation, spreadsheets. These are just like maybe the top 3 or 4 tools in a variety of different categories, but for every one that you see here, there's probably 10 more that do the same thing. So there's a lot of shakeout that will be coming as these firms merge, get bought, go under, whatever. But it's a very chaotic and volatile time. The development is definitely accelerating. Money is being poured into it from VCs all over. And I think, again, we'll talk sort of at the end about some of the cautionary stuff, but it's sort of like we've opened Pandora's box or the genie's bottle, and some people would like to definitely wait a little bit, and we'll talk about why. So what's the possible impact on our particular profession, right? So there's an excellent white paper that I would suggest anyone go out and read from AO PropTech. And this white paper basically looks at a lot of different industries, but it does look at architecture, it does look at AEC software and construction and a lot of things. It looks at a variety of different tools, not just AI, but AI as one component of that, and where these technologies are in terms of their applicability and usability in a particular field. So the darker green is, obviously a very usable thing. And what you'll see there is something that's been around for a while. This column here, which you can't really see too well, is blockchain. And blockchain is fairly dark green. So is some of the generative AI tools, not so much for architecture, but for other industries. So, what we look for is kind of a progression through to the darker colors. But it's a really good white paper. It's probably 20 or 30 pages long. It's a good read. So what are some of the things that are interesting to us? Well, one is coding, right? Being able to write code without knowing code. Right? So Bard is a tool that is sort of like a ChatGPT tool. It's a large language model. It's able to code in more programs. ChatGPT doesn't necessarily code in a language, but it can tell you descriptively how to do something. So if you ask it to write a Dynamo definition that does a certain thing, and look at an example of that later, it can tell you step by step how to do that, which is kind of sort of giving you the ability to code without knowing how to code. Like if you just follow this recipe, you'll have something that works. Whereas Bard can actually code in Python and JSON and some other things. So you can actually give it a question and it can provide you with code that you can then use in a tool or in a program. Text to model, something that we're really interested in, but again, this is all very, very new and doesn't work really the way we want. Hypar is working on a tool. It's not really an AI tool so much as it is machine learning, and it's able to infer based on what it knows about some of the elements that you want to create for a building. Let's say you can say, give me a 10-story building with each floor plate being 20,000 square feet. and it can kind of start to map that out because it knows, a little bit about what a floor plate is, but you couldn't tell HypeR to design a tennis shoe for you because it's not that kind of a tool. It doesn't have that. It doesn't have that expertise, right? So it's more like an expert system that has a text front end that you can use natural language to describe what you want it to do, and it will do that thing. So you can see this tool kind of being built into a tool like Revit or Rhino, where you can start to work with the tool with natural language text prompts instead of your mouse and having to know, exactly how to build those 10 stories. Text to render is another tool that is out there. Evolve Labs Veris has a tool that will work as a plugin to a tool like Revit, and basically you can give it a textual input prompt, right? And that's a word that we'll hear a lot of when we're talking about these large language models is, what is the prompt? What do you ask to get a result? And the way that you word something is crucial to what you get, right? So if the more descriptive you are, the more detail that you can give, oftentimes you get a better result. Not always, but a lot of times. And like I said, you can come here with this plugin and you can say, show me this scene in winter or spring, or show me this in the setting of a large city. And it will go ahead and, understand that if it's in a large city, then there's going to be large buildings around it, and it'll build that in the background, and it'll put snow on the ground, and it can do all those other kinds of things just based on your text input. But if you look a little closely, like I said, you'll see, like the people can sometimes look a little thin manny. They're a little creepy. You get weird reflections sometimes. You'll just get artifacts that don't make sense. But like I said, it looks good from a mood board, but it's not really useful in any traditional sense of how we use it in the design process. So at some point, though, that will probably change. Outpainting is another interesting tool, right? Dolly tool has the ability to take an image. In this case, I gave it this image here, and it, based on my prompt, modern architectural office, lounge area next to an open office, and filled in the rest of it. So it looked over here, it added some funky, weird carpets. It added the end of the couch with some wood and sort of things. But again, like if you look at some of the details, it's like, what's going on with this leg here and these legs here? And there's some people sitting at a table over there. They're a little strange, but it kind of gets the idea, right? It takes the light that's here and kind of extrapolates it. It basically is trying its best, given what you gave it, which is this image, to generate all this new stuff over here. So it's an interesting tool for, adding context around an image, or extending that image, if you will. Nate's Studio Desk, which you can find on YouTube. This guy's just out there just kind of pushing the limits, seeing what he can do. This is an example of text to code to models, right? So what he's done here is he's used ChatGPT, Bard to code JSON, Python scripts, sorry, not JSON, but Python. And then using that Python script to create generative components inside of Rhino. So, these are the kinds of tools that right now, they aren't really tools. You just kind of cobble things together and see if you can make it work. But eventually these things will probably be built into tools. But it's a very interesting time to see what's going. And we're particularly interested, and I think a lot of people would be interested in more of this type of text to models or text to code to models, because really, if we can't model, then we can't do certain things, to go back to something like Veris, right? I can't say, show me this in elevation, right? Because that's not what this tool does, right? It's really working with what you have, because it doesn't understand the geometry of it. It understands it as an image only. Here we're getting to something more where, it does understand the geometry through the code that you create through GPT. So when you get to a tool where you could say, build me a a block with these types of parameters and then stack that block, you start to get to a point where you could stop maybe using a mouse and start using the keyboard. Not solely, but as another way to, be able to describe what you're trying to do. Because sometimes the difficulty is not in your vision and what you have in your head, but how do you get to building that, right? Do I have to know how to code to do that? Do I have to know Python? Do I have to know Grasshopper? While those tools are pretty ubiquitous and a lot of people do know them, a lot of people don't. A lot of people, everybody seems to know English pretty well, at least, here stateside. And when you can start to tell a program what you want it to do in a language that everybody understands, including the computer, then we get to something that's pretty exciting and different. Another tool here, I'll just click and let this play, but this is images to video. This is NERF, neural radiance fields. And basically, this tool is an AI that takes some subset of pictures of a space, and using those pictures creates a 3D environment that you can then walk through. So it's similar to what you might get if you went in and did photogrammetry, right? And did maybe shot a point cloud, could get the same type of thing. But what you're also getting here is much less artifact, much less of the kind of aliasing that you see in some of the other programs. This data looks smooth and complete, as opposed to what you might see from a typical scan data, or even from photogrammetry, where you might get some weird places where stitching happens together. So these neural radiance fields, which are based on a grid, are just one of the really interesting things that are starting to come out. What use does it have in the architectural profession? Hard to say right now, but you could certainly see for renovation projects where you might go out and take several pictures, where something like this is beneficial if you could bring it back and say, okay, now that I've done this, build me a model based on that. So images to video to model would be good, right? So how might we work with these tools now and in the future, right? I think, just scratching the surface, there's obviously a lot of areas where you can start to use these tools right now. Kind of mood boards, design material ideation. I mean, one of the things that we've looked at is, if we take some of our interiors type boards and say, what does this look like with a different color palette? We can give it a color palette and start to toy around with design ideas. As a writing assistant, it's fairly obvious. Things like ChatGPT are good at cranking out a lot of content based on your prompts, and we'll look at some of that and the ways that it's good and the ways that it can be kind of weird. So whether you're writing, where you're answering RFPs, or you're writing copy for your website, or you're communicating with a client, they can be jumping off points as tools to save you time and effort. Model informed creation, right? That's something that we really like. We would like to be able to do. Some people are starting to scratch that, but there's nothing kind of out of the box that works right now that can do that very well. A QA/QC assistant. We'll look at a thing in a second here called ChatDoc, which lets you kind of query a document. And so you can have a conversation using an AI to talk about what's in a document and pull information from that. And that's basically talking to a document. So here's ChatDoc. ChatDoc lets you basically add a document that you can then query, right? So here we've got the IBC, part of the IBC in there. Can't load the whole thing in, but that's really a limitation of computing. What requirements do I need to know about designing a staircase as a means of egress, right? It says it's not sure. Can you be more specific? And then we are more specific, and then we get a good chunk of stuff from IBC with complying to certain codes, 1007.3, and all kinds of things that, if you're new to the IBC, if you're new to the business and you're looking at this stuff and you don't know how to go through that document, it's nice to have a tool that can look at your question and knows exactly what's in that document and can respond to you with correct answers. Now, we like this tool a lot just because, it actually is got a data set of one document, right? I mean, obviously there's the language model that the tool is built on, but when it's looking to answer your questions, it's not going outside of that document to get other things. And so you can be a little bit more secure with the results. But being secure with the results is one of those things you really have to kind of think about the tool that you're using and what it might do. So what might AI take over? What might it just take away from us doing? Well, you know, we look at things that we would like to do less of, the kind of drudge work, right? As architects, you know, most people want to spend their time solving the problems and being creative. And there's a whole host of things that have to be done, especially in this day and age, that take away from the ability to do that. So, you know, getting presentations ready, right? I mean, they take a lot of time. You're really mostly worried about the content, but putting together the presentation still needs to be done. And so AI can help us create these things kind of on the fly in a fraction of the time that it takes a person to put them together. So maybe you're spending less time on presentation prep and more time on design. Software support is an easy one. We'll see some examples of some of this when we look at the tools that I have bookmarked, where we can go in and say, oh, you know, I can't see X in my Revit model. What might I need to do to be able to see that? And those are the kinds of things that are part of what I do, is, you know, kind of providing support for people. But why I can't see my furniture is like the last question I probably want to answer every day for a while. So the ability to be able to say, oh, if I could ask Revit directly, why can't I see this? And it gives me 3 things to try. That saved time. So copy personalization. And what I mean there is basically writing copy that's personalized to, you know, yourself, whether maybe it's an email, maybe it's a longer chat, maybe it's a letter to a client, maybe it's a response to, like I said, an RFP or quals for your organization. And these are kind of jumping off points that, again, you know, we can give it the data that we provide in terms of how we normally respond to these things, and it could look at that stuff and create a personalized one for a specific client and research on these things. So, you know, we can use our own documentation as a database for some of these tools to use to create content that is in our style, if you will, in a personal style or a firm-wide style. So what tools are currently being tested? What are we looking at right now? We're looking at a lot of data extraction, right? It's one of the things that was easy to kind of low-hanging fruit, if you will, right? So these are testing only, I should say, right? We don't basically do anything with AI that we just then send off to a client. We're doing very little of that, right? We're really just looking and seeing what kind of results we get and how we feel about that, right? So one of the interesting things is being able to have, you know, a tool look at a contract like ChatGPT and say, tell me all the deliverables and milestones that are in this document. So I don't have to read through the whole thing and suss all that out, and I don't want to miss anything, right? Or like I mentioned earlier, you know, image descriptions. We have a huge image library. We want to make sure that they all have hashtags, and we post them to something like Instagram that they're as accessible as possible to other people. Content creation, right? Again, with ChatGPT, you know, and Bard, we can, you know, start to create marketing material. And these are again, they're frameworks. I just want to be really clear that, you know, nobody should go out and just say, oh, I can do this with ChatGPT. I put in a prompt, it gives me a bunch of stuff. I copy paste it into an email and send it off. And then later I'm embarrassed because it's in something weird. And we'll look at some of that weird stuff too. And then image generation, you know, Midjourney and DALL-E 2, you know, they're somewhat useful in terms of graphics, right? So if you're looking for, and I'm not talking about architectural stuff, but if you're making a presentation and, you know, you really have a slide that you really want to create a set of woodworking tools on a bench in a garage, right? It's going to be really good at doing that. The downside to that is that a lot of this stuff right now, we just don't know. Well, we sort of know, but where it's coming from. What does the copyright mean? Where are these images being taken from? The images that are made are an amalgam, right? A mashup of other stuff that it's learned. So that's why there's so much wonky artifacts in a lot of these things, is that they're put together from hundreds or thousands of images that might relate to your prompt. So that has yet to shake out completely. So ChatGPT, there's a few examples, right? So I mentioned this furniture example, right? It's like, I can't see my furniture in Revit. What could be the problem, right? And then I get this list, right? And in just a few seconds, there's like 6 or 7 things that I can go and look at. And I didn't have to call someone. I didn't have to fill out, a help desk ticket and wait. Not that that's necessarily a bad thing. I mean, usually answers, you don't need them instantly, but I ran these basically as a check to see what types of things it said were any of them wrong or incorrect. It's not a complete list. There are other reasons that you could not see furniture in something like Revit, but this is a good place to start. It's an excellent first stab at it. Dolly 2. So this is where we start to get into things that are interesting, but not super useful to us yet, right? So I ask it at a prompt, show me a modern 4-story hospital made of wood, steel, and glass near the woods with a large pond and walkways, et cetera, et cetera. And I get these 4 images, right? And this is what it thinks I mean. Is that what I mean? It's hard to say. One of the things that you can do in a tool like Midjourney is to be able to say, okay, imagine that same thing, right? A 4-story hospital made of wood, and I get 4 images, and these are of a different nature, right? And so that's one of the things that you'll see is you go to these different tools, and depending on the database or the data sets that they have available to them, they create wildly different things. These are a little more interesting. I put in our firm name just because I wanted it to see if it would go out and find anything that we had produced in the past. I liked this one, so I asked it to give me variations on this one. So, when you use Midjourney, you have the ability to say, okay, here's 1, 2, 3, 4. One of the things you can do is get variations on one of those. So I did 4 variations on this, and I got these 4 here. And then I decided I kind of like this one with the little branch in there. And then you have the ability to upscale any of these to a larger image, right? So then I end up with something like this. Now, how does this help a designer? I mean, I don't think anybody's going to use this to create their designs, but you can also see where if it better understood it, or maybe if it was trained on a library of just images that our firm has produced, you might start to get to something that's more interesting. But again, without being able to convert this to an actual usable piece of geometry or something, you're kind of stuck with something that you can't really do much with. But be that as it may, Midjourney also has the ability to describe things. So I mentioned that we were pulling out tags and other things, but you can also ask it to describe to you an image, right? So we give it an image, and it gives me 4 different possible definitions. If you're wondering what this AR thing down here, that's the aspect ratio of this image, 120 to 59. And so, it'll give you a variety of different descriptive images, right? It's a colorful couch and tables with a window. Sometimes it'll tell you it's in a particular style of an artist or an architect, modern and sleek. So you can look at those. And one of the interesting things then that you can do is you can take that definition and turn it around and have it reimagine the definition of the thing you just showed it. And we get back to that same thing where it gives you 4 variations, and here I've upscaled one, but these are nothing like the image that I gave it. So you can see how almost like the butterfly effect, how far you can get away from an image quickly with just the description that it thinks is appropriate for the image we gave it, and then creating another image based on that same text and getting something so different that it's unrecognizable. So, there is a caution in there that, it doesn't have the ability to, how much it really understood about the other image, I think is shown here by how it creates an image from the same things that it think described the other image. So the fact that they're so different in my mind means that it didn't really understand that image that well to begin with. It's really more of a mashup. So before we get into the caution stuff, I wanted to walk through some of the tools that we are using here. Sorry, I'm going to pop out of this for a second over to our tool here. So here's Evolve Labs Veris. You'll see, like I said, there's several variations on what you can tell it to do with your model. You look at some of the windmills there. They get really funky looking, but it's worth going and playing with them and getting an idea of how they work together. This is a tool for Omniverse from NVIDIA. This tool basically will let you place objects in a room, and it's really just machine learning. It's got a database of things that have keywords attached to them, so you can ask in natural language, show me all the things that generally belong in a warehouse and dump them in this room, and then you can move them around. But again, not the most useful tool. This tool is HyperR, which we talked a little bit about, and we'll provide links for all of these if you want to go and sign up for them and tinker around with them. But you can start to see the things that can get built here just with text input. Stable Diffusion is another tool that creates images based on prompts. And I use the same prompt for this tool, right, which is a 10-story all-wood apartment building by a large park in Chicago. I did the same thing in Midjourney and got wildly different stuff. And then there's my image from there. So you get a sense that, these tools are all kind of riffing on their own data sets, right? But it is interesting to see the results of things. Here's the cognitive services for Azure. There's a lot of interesting tools down here. We've been kind of toying around with adding captions to images and extracting tags from images, which are pretty interesting. So you can basically give it an image and say, bring me my tags, and it'll bring out all the different things that it sees in there and senses. And of course, DALL-E 2, which we've talked about quite a bit. So here's another 10-story. This is its interpretation of a 10-story wooden building. There's some of the outpainting that it's done. And then some of the interesting stuff that we've done with ChatGPT that we're looking at. Small things, skill extractions, right? Took a resume or a bio and said, you show me the key skills and achievements of everything that's in this person's resume or CV. Write me a Dynamo definition that colors Revit walls by a fire rating. Doesn't write me the definition because it doesn't understand Dynamo, but it does know how to go out. It's been trained on all the content on the internet prior to 2021, so it can go there and find all this stuff and say step by step, here's what you need to do. Building room list. This one, we gave it basically some exported data from a program called Derofus, and asked it to go and find all the lists, the total areas for each room function, right? So it's able to quickly look through and say, oh, I can do all that for you, right? So you see how there's some good time-saving tools in here. Let's see. Here's one of the things that I wanted to show just quickly that, I asked it to write a bio for me, and it basically pulled from our website, and then it kind of went rogue here. I guess it's fairly true up to about here. I'm not, I'm in several professional organizations, but then down here it says that I worked for other prominent firms before HOK. That's debatable. I was not a BIM consultant for a software company. I don't have a degree in architecture from Urbana-Champaign, and I'm not a licensed architect. So there you have a lot of stuff that it just decided to add in there because I'm a guy who works for an architecture firm, and therefore I'm probably an architect, but it's wrong. So finding rooms by area, that's another Dynamo definition. We can start to look at things like BARD, where we can ask it about, I think I started asking about 10-story buildings. Do they all have to have sprinklers? And it starts telling me about the code and NFPA and how it's adopted, and are most buildings over 4 stories, and what happens if they're older, and it kind of goes through all that information. So the really interesting tools that can do a lot of stuff. Here's BARD creating some JSON and Python code. So here's Python code for, I wanted to create a simple chair. I wrote that pretty quickly. A JSON file to capture IFC export settings from Revit. That's accurate. So some interesting stuff there. DDIY. This is just detection tools, which I think is interesting. And this is going to take us into the last section of the caution part, which is, we're going to need to be able to tell which things were maybe done by an AI and which are not. And so they're starting to see tools pop up like this that can detect AI content. So back to the presentation. So what do we have to worry about? One of my favorite quotes is from Werner von Braun, who said, "Science doesn't have a moral dimension. It's like a knife. It's used differently if you give it to a surgeon or a criminal, a murderer." And so what we do with this tool kind of depends on how well we do thinking about it before we implement it everywhere. So what could possibly go wrong? Again, we can provide links for all these. Sundar Pichai, who's the Google CEO, is sort of worried. A lot of people are pretty worried that this is happening too fast. AI impacts everything, and no one company should be in control of one or more popular AIs. And one of the disciplines that he kind of singled out was architects, and this idea that AIs could help build buildings that are unbuildable, or that have flaws in them that could result in people getting hurt. DeepMind is one of the tools that, it's one of the tools that starts to take AI and lets it learn on its own. So they gave it decades worth of soccer videos, and it learned to play soccer. So and then it learned to play soccer in a week or so. It can make disinformation work. We can't adapt as fast as AI, but I think the fact that he and a few other people were optimistic that there are people out there who are ringing the warning bells and saying a lot of people are in favor of a 6-month pause. There's a big letter going around. 25,000 people have signed it, academics and other people. You liken back to the Manhattan Project, and where scientists were signing letters saying we better step back from this. And I think a lot of people feel the same way about AI. Max Tegmark, who's a physicist at MIT, is worried about a couple things. Moloch is sort of from Judaism. It's like an ultimate evil. He also talked a lot about FOMO and companies and countries being afraid that they will fall behind. I think one of his points was, is China going to stop developing AI because we say, oh, we should all pause? And also this idea of optimization, right? And telling an AI to optimize for a particular thing. He talked a lot about capitalism and it being optimized for profit, and what is that doing to us? But one of my favorite things is if you optimize to make paper clips, then an AI could theoretically take over the planet and all its resources just to make paper clips, even if we don't need anymore. So there are those people out there that are trying to warn us that we need to slow down a little bit. Auto GPT is a form of GPT that basically talks to itself. So it starts to have conversations with itself and have make decisions based on its conversations with itself, which is a little bit worrying. And then there's Hugging GPT, which is a tool that kind of pulls together large language models and some other tools, some other AI tools together to solve problems. So these are tools that are kind of bootstrapping themselves into being able to not just be the provider of response, but the progenitor of the prompt, right? So I don't need you to ask me a question. I'm going to ask my own question and I'm going to solve it in my own way. So these are the things that are keeping some people up late at night. There's DeepMind learning to play soccer relatively quickly. So there's a couple of learning resources that I had in here. 2-minute papers, which I mentioned, I think at the top of the call, is an excellent YouTube video. It's basically a very quick video and it covers things like this. This is how I got interested in ChatGPT 5 years ago, because it was an amazing tool at the time that I'd never seen anything like. And OpenAI, which produces DALL-E and ChatGPT. So we are at 2 p.m. I have blown through this. I want to thank our sponsors all across the board, and especially Ideate is our lead sponsor for TAP. And then we've got Ideate software. TAP has a special offer for those in TAP. And then you can find the AIA TAP on LinkedIn and here at AIA Chicago. So thank you. I'm sorry, I got really bogged down, I think, in some details, not bogged down, but there's just a lot to cover. There's just so much right now. So if you have questions about the presentation today and we didn't get a chance to answer them here, if you'd like to email me directly at david.ivey@hok.com, I'd be happy to help out or answer any questions that you might have.